Right, so let's now turn to another thing that might seem like it can't be justified if we lack free will, namely punishment, in particular criminal punishment. So if we lack free will, how can we justify criminal punishment? Now, one potential justification might be quite apparent to you from the previous discussion. We might think that maybe we can justify criminals on the basis that we can improve their behavior. So if we send someone to prison for a few years, it'll, help improve them. And maybe it'll help deter them in particular, but it might also have a sort of more general deterrent effect. Maybe sending people to maybe the fact that everyone knows you might go to prison if you commit something wrong will have a general deterrent effect. And when we send particular people to prison, this might also help deter them. And so the whole general practice of punishing people will have very specific effects for moral improvement and more general effects for moral improvement. Now, when it comes to the more specific effects for moral improvement, Per Boom himself is a little bit skeptical. He thinks that, if you look at the actual evidence, it's not clear that sending people to prison really helps improve their behavior. He's particularly focused in the US context and US prisons, and evidence there seems to suggest that that kind of imprisonment doesn't really lead to moral improvement, doesn't really help people become better people. They get sent away for a few years, sometimes more than a few years, and they kind of more or less stay the same. Sometimes they even become worse people and become more hardened criminals as a result of being sent to prison for something fairly minor. So Per Boom, rather than thinking that we can justify punishment in terms of moral improvement, he in fact proposes a kind of quarantine model of punishment. And the idea is that we send people to prison and we punish them. We sort of punish them by putting them in prison, not because they deserve it, not because they acted freely and knowingly, but rather because we're sort of quarantining them. They're dangerous people and we're putting them away to avoid them being dangerous around everyone else. So given the current world situation, the idea of quarantining people and the justification for that is maybe a familiar idea. Maybe some of you are familiar with the current global pandemic about the coronavirus. This might have affected some of your lives. Certainly affected my life and affected many other people's lives in more significant ways. But throughout this pandemic, governments have used quarantining, right? The idea is that if you quarantine someone when they have an infectious illness, whether it's coronavirus or the Ebola virus or something else, you're not sort of taking them out of society or keeping them away from society because they've done anything wrong or they're blameworthy or responsible. Rather, you're doing it for harm prevention reasons. You think that, or the authorities think that by keeping people quarantined, keeping people at home, keeping people away from others, it's going to stop an infectious disease spreading, and it's going to limit the amount of people who get sick, the amount of people who die, the amount of people who suffer. And so you justify it on this harm prevention reason. So Per Boom thinks that punishment is relevantly similar or can be justified in a relevantly similar way. But criminals they're dangerous. They pose dangers to people. Violent criminals might commit violent crime. Gang members might engage in gang violence. They are people who cause harm. And so we have some justification for taking them out of society and keeping them away from society, regardless of whether they've acted freely and knowingly. Right? If they lack free will or in a world without free will, they don't basically deserve this punishment. But we still have good reason to do it. And so we can quarantine people, in a sense, in prisons or other appropriate places for as long as they pose a danger. So as long as somebody's a danger to society, which they will have proved by committing a violent crime, let's say, as long as they're a danger to society, then we can keep them out of prison. We can justify it that way. So again, this kind of imprisonment is justified on harm prevention reasons. As with quarantining people in a pandemic, imprisoning people can be justified in a similar way. So Per Boom thinks that, even if we lack free will, we can still maintain one of our current practices. In fact, Paraboom doesn't think that we should maintain imprisonment in the same kind of way as they have in the US right now or in certain other countries. He thinks that this kind of quarantining should be similar to quarantining for the coronavirus. People should be made quite comfortable. They should just be kept away from others, because the aim isn't really to make those people suffer. Criminals shouldn't suffer on this model. They should just be prevented from making other people suffer and causing harm. They really are quarantined. So let's turn now to another thing that might be affected by lacking free will. This is a much more sort of existential worry you might have. And this worry is that, if we don't have free will and we aren't the ultimate originators of our actions, does anything mean anything at all? Do we have meaning in life? Is everything just meaningless? If this is all just some sort of cosmic chess game that we're playing out by two competing gods or the laws of nature, we're all just dominoes falling on top of one another. Does anything mean anything at all? Is this just all just a pointless charade that we're going through the motions of? Well, unsurprisingly, perhaps unsurprisingly, Paraboom doesn't think so. And perhaps unsurprisingly, this is the kind of worry that has concerned many other kind of skeptics about free will. So some hard determinists, going back to the Stoics and more modern ones like Ted Honderich, they've considered the worry, like Paraboom does, that your projects, achievements, and goals would just seem meaningless, pointless. But all is the result of the initial conditions of the universe and the laws of nature, or is all down to like randomness or luck. And they've thought, well, this would be quite a bad situation. So skeptics about free will, the hard incompatibilists, hard determinists, they've tried to show that things wouldn't be so bad if we lacked free will. We could still get meaning in life. So it's worth considering what the Stoics thought, because they were some of the sort of early kind of hard determinists. Sometimes they're considered compatibilists, sometimes hard determinists, but they at least thought that determinism was true. And even though determinism is true, they thought that, and that didn't take away meaning, but might in fact bring with it meaning. And the way some of them thought about this is that, just accept that you're like a pawn in a galactic chess game. Just accept that God or the universe or some external forces are controlling everything, and there's nothing you can really do. And by really sort of meditating and accepting that everything is outside of our control, Stoics thought that you could actually sort of come to identify yourself with the universe, with God, and see yourself as part of this, galactic chess game, this huge cosmic story unfolding, and that would bring with it a sense of peace and acceptance. But one thing it might do, even if it can give us that sense of peace and acceptance, is that on a personal level, we still might not satisfy what we want to get out of life. So we might have these life hopes. We might have things that we want to do in life. Maybe you want to climb Mount Everest. Maybe you want to visit a foreign country, which is currently quite difficult to do. Maybe you just want to meet with your friends in public without the fear that you're going to infect and kill them. These are kind of life hopes that we might have. But if everything's like kind of outside of our control, we lack free will, it seems like we just don't really have the power to bring any of that about. So the Stoic point about peace and acceptance, it might seem pleasant in one way, but again, it cuts against the idea that we can really bring anything about. And another thing to worry about with the Stoic view is that, we end up having to accept a lot of suffering and misery if we just accept everything that happens around us. And that could be another way in which actually, if things are all outside of our control and we can't really stop suffering and misery, it's all predetermined to happen, it's another way in which life might come to seem meaningless. So, if everything's outside of our control, all down to luck, the laws of nature, whether they're deterministic or indeterministic, seems like we might not really be able to bring about our life hopes. And in that sense, we're going to lose or not be able to achieve a certain type of meaning in life because we won't be able to bring about what we hope to bring about. So it seems then that maybe life hopes kind of assume that we have an open future, but more particularly, maybe they just assume that we can sort of, overcome our initial conditions, overcome our characters and circumstances, and kind of write our own stories, be the authors of our own lives, and not just play out this kind of like cosmic play set up by the initial conditions and played out by the laws of nature. So the hard determinist, Ted Hoderick, he thinks that, well, ultimately, if determinism is true, and he's a hard determinist, so he thinks determinism is true, he thinks that if determinism is true, it is going to affect our life hopes. We can't get around that. It's going to affect the things that we can do and how we conceive about life, and it's going to affect the meaning of life in some way. But he thinks that determinism doesn't completely destroy our life hopes. There is still some meaning we can salvage in this world without free will. An important thing that he thinks is that, okay, we can't alter how things turn out. We can't sort of, do otherwise, or, we can't overcome luck or randomness or being determined, but we can still get what we want sometimes. So if one of your life hopes was to climb Mount Everest, you can still get that. It might still turn out like the world is such that the single physically possible future that unfolds, if determinism is true, includes you climbing Mount Everest, or includes you riding a bike, or includes you meeting up with friends without infecting and killing them with a deadly pathogen. These are the kinds of like nice things that might turn out to happen. So for you as an individual, your life hopes might work out. It's great for you. So really, like, the kind of seems a little bit twisted in the end that, if you're lucky, you can still have a meaningful life. But it has this kind of like, still has this depressing side to it that, what if you're unlucky? What if you're one of those many unlucky people that doesn't get what they want in life? Well, you don't really have much power to overcome that on this view. So tough luck. I mean, it's important to realize here that, if it turns out we don't have free will, it is going to be costly. And as much as skeptics about free will try and make it seem like it's not so bad, life is not so bad, we can still get a lot of the things that we thought we had when we thought we had free will. We are going to have to pay some costs. We are going to have to sort of bite some bullets and accept some hard truths. And this seems like it's going to be one of them.